let's give this a try and see if the sound comes through here. Still muted, okay. How about now? Can you hear me now? Working. Okay, there we go. Well, it's always something, isn't it, folks? There you go. Well, I really like to waste your time with as many technical difficulties as I can at the start of a stream, so I thought I'd just do that. But thanks for bearing with me there. It looks to me like I can't use my preferred microphone, so I'm sorry if the sound is not going to be very loud. I'll crank it as loud as I can, but it's probably not going to be anywhere near as high quality as what we had before. That's about the best I can do there. Let me know if that sounds a little better, if it's not too faint. Hopefully that's pretty good. I don't want to shout at you, but I do want to make sure you can hear me, so just let me know in the chat how that sound is for you. And if it's good, we'll roll on. Sound is not clear, says Afroha. Okay. Some quality is better than no quality. Well, don't know if I agree with that, but okay. Oh, sound is very good. All right. Hey, whatever it takes. I don't know. I don't know what's going on here, folks. I will say that we're getting fiber optic in a couple of weeks, apparently, here where I live. And everything will be better. I'll be able to stream without too much trouble. And in the meantime, I'll try and figure out what's going on with the sound. But listen, we've got a lot to do. What I was talking about was the Lightbox conference in Pasadena. And the reason I've been kind of absent, working on some stuff here, obviously for Adobe, bouncing around with different things with Express and education, but also traveling to Pasadena for the Lightbox conference. And I was explaining that I think it's so important for people to get to these conferences if they can. I understand that it's obviously not cost effective for everyone, but what I was trying to say up at the top of the show when I was muted was that all the greatest opportunities in my life that I've had as an illustrator, as an artist, have come from in-person interaction with other artists and art directors and people like that. So I want to say that this particular conference is just jam-packed with people who love to draw, people who care about drawing, and people who can give you opportunities to maybe do that professionally, whether it's through mentorships or simply just hanging around them, asking them questions about how they got started in the industry and so on. But there are also people hiring there. So it's going to be, again, I believe, in Pasadena next fall. Check it out, October. That's the time, so plan ahead. And if you can make it, awesome. There's another conference coming up this year, and that is the Icon Conference. That's an illustration conference, which I believe is in July, if not June, but I'm pretty sure it's July this year. Look for that as well, ICON, Icon. Try to get out there with your community, build relationships in person if you can. The internet's an interesting and wonderful place, but it's not the end-all be-all, and I've always found that in person is the way to go. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. I'm glad we have audio. I'm glad the stream is working now, and we're going to kick it over to Photoshop and do a little drawing together. So let's do that. Peter says, I wish I should attend one year. Misty, I wish I knew about it. Yeah, hey, you know, it's one of those things. Now you know, right? Misty, I was in your neighborhood. Cool. You're lucky to live in that area. It's a nice area. Very nice, very nice. All right. Everybody's here. Hey, what's up, Peter and Umacorn and Robert and Afroha and Patrick and Eva or Ava. Bacon Bits, great name. Very nice to see you. All right, folks, thanks for joining me. Cryo is here as well. And let's do it. All right, so here's my little sketch. I've got this little rabbit or whatever it is standing here holding out the hand to see, is it still raining? Now, what I wanted to talk about today was this idea of working with a limited palette. I have said many times on my live streams with you all that I do not consider color to be one of my strengths, but I come up with ways to simplify it and make it easier for myself so that I can create illustrations that kind of work. And so for those of you out there who are feeling the same way, or even if you're not, you just want to quickly get to something that works, here's what I like to try and do. I like to work within one little section of the color wheel, and I'll pull up my color wheel here. We go from the hue cube to the color wheel, and you can see here that I can shift around. And what's nice is working maybe in some kind of area where you're using about, I would say 30 to 40% of the color wheel. So analogous colors, colors that are close to one another. Now this is a rule that you have to also pay attention to with regards to which colors are using, because if you look in an RGB spectrum here, if you look at the color wheel, look at this section of green here. I mean, it all looks the same. So if I were to tell you, oh, we're going to work with 40% of the color wheel, and you go, okay, cool, that's basically this green. Well, that's really kind of not what you want, is it? So you have to kind of use your judgment about how much can you really cover, as long as the colors are feeling close enough to one another in hue that they're really going to play fairly well together. Now remember that the more saturated the color is, okay, the harder it is to get those colors to play nicely together, all right, because that color is so intense. And you can also look out for things like if I go here to a green like this and say, yeah, I want to use that green and I want to paint with it, that color is most likely not going to be color safe for printing, okay, because it's a super bright green, right? And normally we'd have a little warning sign to show us that. If I move over to the hue cube, we should hopefully see that color, but it's actually not working. The reason for that is there's currently a bug with our color panel here in Photoshop, which they're fixing for the next release. If I go ahead and open here using my color picker, you'll see this little warning show up, and normally you'd see it here as well. And what this is telling me is, Kyle, this color is just crazy. It's way too bright and saturated for it to print correctly. If this matters to you, if the work you're doing is for print, you should be aware of that. And if you want to get around that, what you do is you tap on the little square beneath that warning. And what that'll do is find the color that is the closest to the color you're wishing to use in hue, saturation, and value, that is also print safe. Okay, gang? All right, so anyway, moving on. We're just going to work with a limited palette. Now it's rainy here, but that doesn't mean I can't play with colors. For example, maybe I want the whole thing to have sort of a pinkish kind of a cast to it. You really can do whatever you want. The thing I wanted to show you today was using a limited palette and then using one pop of color with something relatively complementary to the rest of the palette, okay? Now it's kind of obvious that in an illustration like this, there's a place I want you to look, and that place is going to be around here, okay, where our character is, especially the face. So it's going to make sense if I were to draw your attention there in one of several ways. One way I could do it is with a pop of color that is complementary to the environment. So if the environment is a lot of desaturated pinks and reds and things like that, then it would make sense that I would go bounce over to the other side of the color wheel, which I'll show you here again. If I'm using colors around here, well then if I were to bounce over here and use colors that are in this green area, greenish blue, those are going to pop, right? And if just to demonstrate that, if I go ahead and put some color down here, and we'll take care of these background colors. We'll just get rid of them for a moment. And watch this. If I've got a bunch of colors back here that are all based on these reds and pinks and whatnot, okay? So we've got a bunch of this stuff going on, blah, blah, blah. Okay, if all of this is what's happening in the background, okay, and you see a field of color like this surrounding our figure, okay, and I'll just make sure that I have enough color here to kind of surround the character. All right, now, if I have this situation and I go for a color like this right next to it, which is part of that same family, it is more saturated, okay? But look at this. If I were to take black and put a layer over everything and go to hue, you'll notice a problem right away, which is that the values are pretty much identical there. So I'm not using value to make that pop, am I? All right. Now, using that same red, let's go ahead and let's go all the way to this very light pink right here. Now, I'll keep that black layer on, and I'll paint with that. So we're still only seeing our values here, but look at the difference there. Now, what I've done is I've made a little bit of contrast there, haven't I? If I turn this off, you'll see that when I turn it back on and you look at the color here and the color here, they look pretty similar, don't they? But from a values perspective, okay, that contrast there is a lot greater thanks to what I've done here. Now, if I were to go even lighter and really make that pop, and then use something darker for the underside of this leaf umbrella, whatever you want to call it, that the character is holding, okay? And then we do this. Okay, well now we're in a situation where, if we turn this back on, you see that that's not too bad because I'm silhouetting the head with a dark border or background, right? So that's helping it to pop. So one way to make things pop is with value, but the other way to do it, of course, is with color. And a combination of the two is pretty darn effective. So let's do this. We've got these warm colors based on that reddish kind of hue that we were using right there, okay? What happens if I simply bounce over to this side of the color wheel, okay? Increase that saturation a little bit, and we can check that color right here. Is that color safe? Sure is. And then we put that color over there. So right away our eyes go, oh my gosh, look at that. That is definitely different from what's happening around it, okay? See the difference there? So that's a way to take advantage of this technique. So what we want to do is we want to use colors that are all similar to one another for most of the environment, and then just a little pop of color that's a little different for the animal. You don't have to go so crazy. Look, you can be really desaturated here and use a light value. I can go really, really desaturated with that color. I mean, look at where that is. It's almost a full-on gray, okay? But because of what's next to it, it takes on a bit more saturation. That's just one of the things that happens, okay? And again, you can use a combination of hue and value right there to really make that pop. And if you squint and look at it, you'll see that it's really quite effective, okay? All right, so we'll get rid of all that nonsense. And let's do something a bit more logical. We'll go ahead and we'll use some, I think, some, you know, blues and greens and things in this kind of area for our environment. And I can really go quite a ways around it. And I can be fairly safe. Remember, not going with these really super saturated colors, okay? But the other thing I want to do is use that technique I've shown you before where you can actually mix color. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat really quickly. I see somebody saying no, exclamation point. I worried that something happened to the stream again. No, okay, good. It's not me. Just making sure, folks. Hey, Delphine, thanks for joining us. Jack, what's up? All right, so moving on. So here's that technique I've shown you before. I'll go ahead and knock my sketch back so that it's a lot more faint. It's not really getting in the way of what we're doing here. And that technique is going ahead and picking some colors to start with, using a brush like the creamy brush in the Mega Pack. That's what I'm using right here, because it allows me to use light pressure and have less opacity. You could even use the creamy variation and get even more of that effect. You can also do things like change the flow of the brush, and that makes it easier to lower the opacity. You can go into your brush settings, you can go to your transfer. Here we have opacity jitter. We can reduce the jitter, reduce the amount of opacity that we get with light pressure. There's lots of things you can do to adjust these brushes and make them work for you. But starting with a color like this and then coming over here to a color like this, saying there's another color, and then popping over here and making these sort of my primaries, if you will, okay? And then just mixing everything from these like I would with traditional paint. So grabbing one color, painting with light opacity over another, and then creating these nice neutrals like so is going to give me some nice colors. Now for the darks, you can choose any of these to be your main dark. I could choose the green here. Make sure we do that like this. And again, this color wheel is not going to work, so I'm going to have to pop over here to make it work. I can make that my quote-unquote black, and then I can mix that with other colors as well. So I'm using this method of mixing and creating a palette that's very similar to how I would do it with traditional media, okay? That one went a little dark. We'll go a little lighter than that. There we go. Very nice. And then you do the same thing with either white or a similar kind of color. We go to the light green here, for example, and we just pop that up here and say that's going to be my lightest value for mixing everything. Okay, it's not pure white. Notice that. Pop that down. I'll turn our sketch off so you can really see what I'm doing here. And then I can combine that with other colors. And very quickly, by using this method, you can build a little palette. See this? Now, if you're not familiar with this, you can go to my my own personal YouTube page, and I believe this is the video that I have highlighted on that page. This method of mixing color, and there's a demo for that as well. But anyway, so here I get a bunch of colors. Now what I can do is I'll make a new layer and just grab these colors and line them up. Okay, so we've got some nice darks. We've got all kinds of things here. Got the light right there. And for each of these, I can continue to mix them with one another. I can move even further around the color wheel if I want to get really exciting, you know, with stuff like this. Get a little bit more kind of crazy with a purple or something, you know. Don't want to go too nuts. But, you know, I'm not traveling too far from my starting point. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier. And then mixing that with this and getting another color like this. And then lots and lots of neutrals can be mixed from all of these. For example, here and here yields this, okay? All right, so you get the idea. So I've got a palette that feels kind of like this. We can hide this, bring our sketch back, and we'll take our palette and pop it up to the top. And there it is, okay? Now you can even do this. You can expand your canvas and make a little space for your palette. Go ahead and put a little sort of 50% gray kind of value there. And if you move your palette to the top of that, it's kind of nice to be able to look at that and see everything for what it is, okay? All right, and then from here you can mix and you can continue to paint. So what we're gonna do is we'll just block off this area here and make this our little area for painting. And we'll decide on a color that we want to use for the background. I like this color, so I'll just go ahead and fill it all together. And now what I can do is think about values more or less, okay? So looking at this is this color here, I can always turn this black layer on again. This is, remember, set to hue. And if I pop that up to the very top of my image, okay, and let me just make sure that I fill everything with that black so we can use this. There, now I can see my values here. It helps me to see what's dark, what's light, what's everything in the middle, and where I need to fill in the gaps. And I can turn that, toggle that on and off as needed, so that as I'm painting I can see, is that reading clearly, okay? All right, so back to the layer we're gonna use for painting. Here we go. And we're going to continue working on just one layer. I know I do this a lot when I do live streams and everyone thinks I'm crazy, but that's just what I'm going to do now, especially because we don't have that much time. So I'm just going to quickly do this. Sean's asking where I am. I'm in Heidelberg, Sean. Southwest. Lovely area. Very nice. All right, let's do it. So turn this on. Let's look at our values. Cool. I want to have something dark and light here, the highest amount of contrast in our character. Okay, so I'll turn this off and I'll say, all right, let's do this. Let's go ahead and we'll say this could be maybe the color I use for the coat of our character right here. Something like this. And remember, I've got my sketch on a separate layer. This is just for me to quickly block things in and see if they read. And I'm doing this with the assumption that the ground that I'm going to paint, okay, is going to be lighter next to my character here. Okay? That this whole area here is going to be lighter. And I'm even going to go so far as to have these puddles be almost white. And I have that color right here, so you could see what that would look like. See here? Imagine these little puddles on the ground. You want to make those shapes interesting, but for now, I'm just sort of suggesting what they might look like, so you understand what's going on there. Okay? And you can see already that's nice to pop that off against that background there. All right, now, these purple colors might be nice for something like the boots or whatever, just to give them some personality. All right. And for our character, we're probably going to go for something in this vein, but this is where we want to pop over. So we're over here in the color wheel, right? And so what we really want to do is we want to just push it a little bit this way and try something that's going to add some contrast. Okay, so if this is the area I'm in, I'm just bouncing all the way over to this side, and I'm going to do this. And I'm going to commit to that for now, but I might change it later. And again, notice I'm being careful. I'm not using a ton of saturation, am I? Right? I can always come in later and I can punch up saturation and do things like that, but I don't want to do that this early. Right now, I just want to kind of figure things out, okay, generally speaking. And we can always do this. You can hide your sketch and see, can I read everything? You can squint down on it and see how you're going. Okay? So there we go. All right, moving on. Now I want to have a darker value up here around the face and maybe even the hand. So I see where I am here, and I can again use this little handy dandy tool here. And I can say, okay, this is probably where I want to try and go right here. So we can select that and then just try it out. And you'll notice right away what that's doing. It's popping all that stuff a bit more, right? So I can make my brush bigger and I can just say, all right, I'm just going to go ahead and commit to this, and that umbrella will be a different color, but for now, I just want to make sure that I'm getting that area a little darker, right where the head is there and the hand. And remember to use a brush that allows you to control the opacity with pen pressure, so you're not locked into just one value the whole way through. You can use some pressure to control that. All right, so now let's go ahead and look at it again. We'll turn that sketch off, and we can see right away, oh, I know where I'm supposed to look. There's a nice big pop right there for contrast. That's really working nicely, okay? You can look at it in your black layer turned on. Again, that's set to a layer blending mode of hue, and that helps me to see it very clearly and say, cool, we're looking good. Yes, I'm using a Cintiq, and the sound you're hearing is my pen, which is why I wanted to use my headphone microphone, which I paid a lot of money for, and it did not work at the beginning of the show. I cannot figure that out. So we're using basically just the microphone on my MacBook. It's going to pick up all the taps and everything else. So there you go. The reason I have the canvas selected is I just want to paint in this one area. I'm just using it as an active selection. I could mask this layer just as easily and do the same thing. I just happen to have an active selection right now. See here, this is the layer I'm painting on. If I want to just mask it, I could just do that. And now everything I paint is going to stay locked to that same area. Either way, either way. There are so many ways to do so many things in Photoshop, and that's one of the things I love about it. You can, you can do one thing 6 different ways, and everybody has their preferred way of working. So, all right, so using that same color, I'm going to come down here. I'll keep that black layer on while I paint, by the way, just so you can see how useful this is to kind of get an idea of what you're doing just with your values, right? As I come up here to where the feet are, I say, oh, look at that. Those are getting pretty darn close to each other. The feet get lost. Do I want that? Do I care? But then when I turn off that layer, I see, well, at least the color's different. But yeah, that could be a problem later on. I could go darker, I could go lighter. Okay, I could bring some of this back in here, around the feet. Remember that you can decide whatever you want when it comes to this stuff because it's your drawing. You don't have to be so locked in to logic and go, well, this couldn't be because XYZ. It's a drawing. It's not a photograph. So as long as there's a little bit of logic applied throughout what you're doing, then you're fine. Do not feel like everything has to make perfect sense. The reason we like and respond to so many drawings and paintings in the world is because of the choices the artists have made that aren't necessarily reflections of reality. In fact, if they were, they'd be kind of boring. It's the whole idea that you're using your imagination and your power and skill as an artist to represent some version of reality, if you will. But you're making it better then, It's reality, but better. More interesting, more beautiful, more whatever. There's more, and that's what makes it so nice. Okay, so what you want to do back here is you want to use less contrast because you do not want this area to become a focal point, okay? So I'll be able to go later and do things like this. I'll have this tree back here, for example, and it's going to have a little less contrast than the stuff in the foreground, okay? But what I can also do is then I can do little things like shift the hue to make it more interesting. So for example, down here I've got this sort of grayish green kind of a color, and I can select that color and do this. Look, I can push more towards the blues, get a bit more saturated, all right? And I'm just keeping an eye on my values here. See how they kind of go together? And then what I'll do is I'll just pop that in there. And nobody's really gonna complain about that. But what's nice is it gives me another color to work with. But because the values are so close, right, I'm still gonna get a situation where I'm not drawing attention away from what matters. But I can do stuff like this all day. I can grab this color. I could even do things like this. I can go in here and say I've got that color, right? I can go into a completely different zone, and I just keep my eye on what's happening with my values over here, okay? And as long as they're looking pretty darn similar, right? For example, like that, I can even hit that with a bit of color there and get a little bit of vibration there. Right, and this is like in the later stages of the painting, but I want to just fast forward to something like this, for you can see what I'm doing there, okay? And that is a really great technique you can apply where I've got now some blues and some greens and some other things happening in there. I'll turn that sketch off so you can see. All right, but because the values are so similar, and they're still basically analogous colors, really. I mean, not so much here with the pink. It's a little bit crazier, but you're able to add a little punch of color, a little vibration without distracting anybody, if that makes sense. So things to try, things to try. All right, so coming around to the rest of it, I'll turn the sketch back on, and I'm just gonna knock it back a hair again because I don't want those lines to be too distracting. So I like where everything's going. We talked just a moment ago about shifting the hue a little bit. I could decide if I want things to be a little warmer towards the edges, the corners of the drawing, a little cooler. If I want them to go warm to cool from top to bottom, you know, or vice versa, things like that. A lot of times people go cool to warm. If I want to do that, I can look at where I am here with this color here, and I can say, cool, all right, if I want to push that a little warmer, I could come down this way, right, and then just continue to paint with that. Oops, let me go back to the right layer. Got to be painting on the right layer. There we go. Down here, you know, and it's not gonna cause any problems because it's a subtle shift. It's a subtle shift. And this is just kind of like, it's going to be a layer of color upon which other things will sit. Okay? And what I mean is, for example, when I get into more of the details and things, whatever is happening here, this will just kind of show through. Now, when you have something like this tree right here, you can choose to do one of two things. You can choose to have it be lighter than the surrounding area, or you can choose to have it be darker. I mean, you could choose to have it be basically the same value. If you do that, it's just going to get lost, but that could be what you want, right? But it's nice to have choices and to be able to balance things the way you want. So for example, here, I might say, well, I'd like maybe for this to be darker. Maybe I want to draw a little more attention to it that way. Or maybe I'd like it to be both darker and lighter. So what I could do is maybe I like this purple color and I like that that's, you know, something I want to maybe pull into the background. So I'm just going to pop it in there and we'll look at it and say, okay, those values are probably the same. Let me double check. Okay, it's a little darker, right? So I could take that same color and we can push it a little more towards the range that we were happy with from earlier and go a little darker. And we can do a darker tree here. And that's one way to make it stand out as we're getting closer to the foreground. Okay. And if I just turn off my sketch again and we look at it, is it distracting? Is it going to lead me away from the character? We don't know yet. We're not far enough along for that to be something we figured out. But it's important to know that you can change your mind, and it could be darker or it could be lighter. You can see that as it was before, right? It's already standing out. If I go back to that black and white, there's enough contrast there. But we may feel like in order to balance things out, we want to bring in more darks, okay? And in order for it not to feel so isolated, right, we could do something like take this color and say, generally speaking, this could be a quote-unquote tree color in this piece, okay? And if I know that now, I could use it here in the extreme foreground, right? And I could go probably even a little darker because we're in the extreme foreground. So that could be a color I like right there for that tree. We have that branch that's going to come out this way. Remember when you're painting trees, by the way, to put branches in front of stuff. So what I mean is I've got this tree branch and it's coming from the front right here of the tree, not just off to the side. A lot of times when people draw and paint trees, they draw it like the branches are only popping off the side of whatever the silhouette is that they've designed for their tree. And that's, you know, that's not how That's not how tree branches grow, is it? So remember to vary that so that you can have something pop off the front and even cross over here, you know, in front of those other branches, right? Don't forget to do stuff like that. This is something that really helps your tree feel more tree-ish, okay? Is that a word, tree-ish? All right. See that? Okay, but using that dark color there, and then in the background here, we currently have everything feeling about the same, but you can do things like this too. You want these trees to pop. Maybe you can do things like grab a lighter color and just sort of pull that up into the trunks like this. As long as the area that's right next to our character is still reading, right? You can try stuff like this. And again, go ahead, turn off the sketch, check your values, and to see how things are coming along. All right, thanks, Peter. Love the trees. Cool, happy little trees. You cannot do this in Illustrator, do it in exactly the same way. I mean, Illustrator is more of a shape building kind of application, so you're going to be having to make shapes and then decide on a color for them. So this is a pixel-based workflow that I'm doing here. It's pixel brushes, pixels, not quite the same. So, but you can apply this thinking to any kind of image making, okay, if that helps. Let's see what we got here. Another tree could be back there. We haven't yet done the umbrella. We'll bring our sketch back. Now the umbrella, you know, that's the kind of thing, again, maybe you want to add a little pop of color. You want to surprise people a little bit. This is a more saturated version of the color we're using in the background, more or less. It's really all that is, okay? So maybe that's something you want to do. And then you want to go lighter for the canopy here. Is that the right word? There we go. And yeah, you know, I know that what I'm doing is very sloppy in terms of, you know, I'm not like painting inside the lines. It's not like a coloring book. That's fine. In fact, I think that's a nice thing to do at this stage, is just not get so tight, because that forces me to think about bigger shapes and bigger areas and things like that. If I get bogged down in all the details at this stage, I lose the ability to see the bigger relationships and so on. At least that's me. Okay, everyone's different, but again, I am not Mr. Color, so I need to have these little tricks and things up my sleeve in order for things to work. Maybe some of you out there just have a fantastic color sense and you look at me doing all this stuff and go, oh, I could just pick the right colors right out of the gate. I don't need these little cheats. Well, good for you. I do need them. I've always got to have some kind of method upon which to rely in order for my colors to kind of work. So, but the subject for today, we're talking about limited palettes, and so you can see how this is limited, okay? If you look at the range we're working with here, ignoring this little pop of yellow right here, right? Again, hiding the sketch helps to see this. Look at the range. I mean, it's very limited. It's very limited, okay? All right, now moving on. Let's go ahead and let's take this color and let's just throw it back here, and then we'll create more contrast later. Now, at any point, another thing you can do, and this is a really fun trick, is bring my sketch back, At any point, you can use an adjustment layer to see how you're going. So for the rocks, I wanted to use a different color. Again, same kind of area of the color wheel as before. I'm not going crazy here. I just want to see how that feels. Let's go ahead and turn that sketch off. If it feels too close to what's happening here, I can always cool it down, do something else, desaturate a little bit. I mean, it's already very desaturated. Maybe if I pop over this way and try that, that might be a little closer to everything else and cause me less of a problem. So that's probably the way to go. You see that? That's a sort of way to protect myself, you know, go a little lighter. Look, I'm just looking for ways to make sure that this reads, right? That's all we're doing there. Same here. Okay. And maybe we want to go darker there, just like we did with this tree in the foreground. We may just do that. But again, I want to make sure that the main thing I'm looking at here is our little figure, our little character. I'll turn this back on. We'll look and see if the bottom of the umbrella gets lost there. And it does. So what do you need to do? Well, you know we have options. We can go darker or we can go lighter. If you want to have light coming through the canopy, you want to have light coming through the umbrella. That might be an effect that you could pull off. And that does require some real thinking when it comes to the value and the color that you select for that effect. You know, I could choose to just go lighter here and darker there and beef up the contrast. That's one choice. For example, if I go here and maybe we cool it down a bit more, or we could warm it up even. And that increase in saturation there and that different temperature might be enough to make that pop. Look at it again. Yep, it's definitely a little darker now. We can also take this area and we can lighten it just a hair next to the face. Remember what I said earlier, you are in control. You can make all these choices, and provided that there's some reason for them that kind of makes sense for the drawing, but mostly makes sense for it reading clearly and communicating the feeling and the story you're trying to communicate, you're safe. You know, so if I go back here now, I've gone ahead and I've retained a nice bit of contrast there. Okay, but I've also got that umbrella reading a bit more clearly. I want to go lighter here. Let's do that. You know, we come over here and we select that. And remember your option to increase saturation while you increase brightness. That's going to make a big difference. See if I just pop it right there. What happens if I take a look at that? That's starting to read more clearly. You can even go a bit more extreme. And you could do something like this. Maybe you just have it hitting the edge there. Okay, maybe that's what you need. That might work as well. Lots of choices. Maybe that entire canopy needs to be lighter. And then as it falls away here, it can be a little darker. That might work as well. All right, so obviously we won't have time to finish the drawing. That's okay. I want you to see this process and I want you to understand how I go about working like this and using all these colors that are very similar to one another. But we also covered this, which is this ability to, you know, in the later stages, and I would do that with everything. Look at the tree, for example, okay? in the shadow here of the tree. Well, here's this range I'm in, this sort of bluish purple, okay? What happens if I push it a lot warmer? Okay, I can look at my values here and they're spot on, basically identical, right? And I say, sure, I like that. And if I paint some of that into the shadow, they're the same value, right? But what I'm doing now is I'm making that kind of glow a little bit because of that increased saturation and that color being different. It's not just a tint of the color surrounding it. It's actually a different color, different hue, I mean. It's got a bit more saturation, so that could be kind of interesting right there. And I can look at this and I can say, what happens with this? What if I borrow from that? Push that saturation down a little bit, bring it down in value, kind of go around this kind of range. And then maybe as I move down the trunk here, just kind of bring that in. Excuse me. And we turn this back on and you don't see anything, do you? But that's one of those really pleasant things you can do with color. But that's all later, right? First you want to get everything roughed out, really, really basic, so it makes sense. Okay? Now, at a much later stage, you may want to try this, all right, as you're going here. And I'll go ahead and I'll knock in a few things back here so we have some semblance of a background coming into focus there, so it's not completely lost. We didn't even have a chance yet to do the sky idea. I had an idea for sort of bringing in some really light stuff right here to suggest that maybe the storm is passing on, and we're going to have some light coming in. Actually, I want to cool that down significantly, I think, to make that work. Go down this way. There we go. Alrighty. And this is, again, why I use a brush that has a response to pen pressure, because I can sort of move like I'm painting a gradient from one color to another, one value to another, just by using less pressure. All right. But here's what I was going to say. At a later stage in the painting, you want to bring in darker values again. Here and there. Okay, you don't want to have them to have too much contrast. Depends on how you want, you want to make sure things are balanced. But like here and there, I might have some little bits, some odds and ends. Just so it's not, like everything is just centered right here. That would look weird. But that's something to work on later. And the other thing is this. Now we talk about a limited palette. One of the things you can do to force that is to use adjustment layers or layers that you use with a blending mode to sort of push things in one direction or another. So, for example, let's say I'm going through all this and I'm starting to get to a place where things are kind of starting to work. And then I say, all right, I'd like to see what happens if I shift all this stuff towards, the reds. Remember at the beginning of the painting, I was playing around with this idea of using these sort of pinkish reds or whatever. Well, one thing you could do is this. Let's go up here, and we'll just dump an entire layer on top of all this. Just make sure that I I don't have this shape here, that makes no sense. And we'll color it, okay, we'll use sort of this nice orangey color here, or maybe a bit more red. There we go. Okay. So we do this, and you can do things like this. You can overlay, soft light, right? That soft light is really nice, isn't it? That's going to take everything and tint it, and it's going to also bring it together and give you some harmony, okay? So that's one little trick you can use. You can use layer blending modes to see what happens when you try these things. You can even go as far as to do a hue, which is going to really make everything super, super connected to one color, whatever you've selected here. And then you can reduce that opacity to, like, say 60% or something like that, and just see how you go. And you could do the painting in stages this way, where you can continue to add a layer adjustment like this. You could flatten everything and then paint on top of it by shifting the colors just a tiny bit one way or the other. This is another way to do it. So I hope this was helpful. I hope there was enough information here for you to be less intimidated about color. I'm always intimidated by it, but like I said, I use these tricks. I use these little things that help me along. And, you know, apply this to your own work in some fashion. I think that would be good. I hope you enjoyed this time with me. I enjoyed being with you all. I'm sorry about the audio issues up front, but we got it all sorted out. So, in the meantime, until the next time we do meet, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Remember to be kind, and I'll say ciao for now.